Great Demon King, Chapter 49, A Belated Revenge. "Isn't this the necromancy major's errand boy?" Claude asked with a frown as he made his way to stand next to Han Shuo. "Necromancy errand boy Brian. Who would have thought that we'd bump into each other here?" Han Shuo nodded, gulped down another mouthful of purple Leyland, and smiled in response. His transformation over the past month was evident not just in his physique, but also in his newfound confidence and assertiveness. "There seems to be no seats left. Claude, why don't we switch to another place for dinner?" Irene raked a gaze over Han Shuo with a trace of disdain in her eyes. Her cold demeanor was a stark contrast to the lively atmosphere of the hotel. "No need. At this moment, most of the hotels in Drol must be packed with people. There's only Brian at this table. Since we're all from the academy, I'm sure Brian wouldn't mind if we sat down with him, would you, Brian?" Claude said to Irene with a smile, then turned his attention back to Han Shuo. "Of course I don't mind. If you don't feel that sitting with an errand boy like myself detracts from your dignity, I'll gladly share a table with you too." Claude had injured his little skeleton in the past to appease Irene. Perhaps Claude had long since forgotten about this matter, but Han Shuo had silently remembered it. Now that his strength had increased, Han Shuo had lost more and more reservations about taking action. He had been fretting that he had lost his chance to enact revenge on Claude, but who knew that he'd come knocking on Han Shuo's doorstep? Han Shuo was naturally loath to let this opportunity pass by. "I hate everyone from the necromancy major, even errand slaves are without exception." Irene creased her brow, flicked a look at Claude, and spoke coldly. Her words dripped with contempt, revealing a deep-seated animosity towards Han Shuo and his associates. Claude started, then threw a meaningful glance at Irene. He smiled and said to Han Shuo, "Brian, aren't you with the rest of the necromancy major? How come we don't see any sign of them and you're here by yourself? Oh, come to think of it, you, an errand boy, would be able to enjoy such a rich feast of food and wine. How surprising." Irene also looked at Han Shuo with surprise upon hearing Claude's words. She seemed to particularly mind Claude's questions and was in no hurry to leave at this point. When Claude saw that Irene had displayed an expression that indicated her interest, he eagerly wiped off the dust on the seat in front of her. She finally sat down unhurriedly after he had indicated that she should sit, her movements deliberate and controlled. Han Shuo ripped apart the grilled meat in his hand and sent it into his stomach completely, as if nothing had happened. He belched in satisfaction after another mouthful of wine, rubbed his stomach in self-satisfaction, and said with a smile, "Master Fanny and the others should be back soon. They were afraid that I would be a burden and so gave me a few gold coins to wait here for them. Are there any problems?" No. So that's the situation, right? Brian, how was your haul this time? Any high-level magical creatures?" Claude winked at Irene and asked Han Shuo with a smile, his curiosity barely masked by his friendly demeanor. Irene revealed an expression of interest and likewise stared intently at Han Shuo, seeming to suddenly care quite a bit about the necromancy major's haul. Her eyes narrowed slightly, assessing Han Shuo's response for any hidden meanings or intentions. Shaking his head, Han Shuo said, "I don't know. I returned halfway. I don't know if they had any major gains, but I think their haul this time wouldn't be too small." His response was deliberately vague, leaving Claude and Irene to ponder the true extent of his findings. Those people, what kind of haul could they get? They could at most hunt down some level 5 magical creatures, and likely find it hard to kill even a level 4. Irene looked at Han Shuo contemptuously and snorted coldly, her disdain for the necromancy major evident in her tone. Han Shuo only faintly flicked a glance at Irene in the face of her jeering, and didn't say much. At this moment Claude had already hailed the waiter and also used 1 gold coin to arrange for some wine and meat, indicating his intention to further engage with Han Shuo. Han Shuo inwardly took stock of the situation, wondering how to take his revenge on Claude. After thinking for a while, an involuntary trace of a wicked smile appeared on his lips. He calmly and subtly took something similar to a banana peel from the plate in front of him and threw it underneath his foot. When a fast-walking waiter carrying a plate appeared, Han Shuo pushed out with the toes of his right foot and sent the fruit peel abruptly flying out from beneath the table. The waiter was setting a fast pace with plates in hand when he set one foot on the fruit pool, stumbled with an exclamation of surprise, and fell forward. The plate in his hand flew out and hurtled towards Claude and Irene from behind. The unexpected interruption caused the table to momentarily halt, drawing the attention of everyone nearby. Claude and Irene reacted upon hearing the commotion, and suddenly turned around. Claude's right hand abruptly rose and deftly caught the plate crashing towards them. At the same time, Han Shuo's left hand flashed out like lightning, and with a flick of his pinky finger, The gray-white psychedelic aphrodisiac landed Claude's wine glass. Hurry. Be careful when you walk. At this moment, Claude's brow furrowed as his right hand handed over the plate had caught to the waiter, who had stood up once again. His voice was displeased, masking a growing irritation. Thank you, noble knight. I will be careful in the future. The waiter fearfully took the plate from Claude and quickly left after a bow, his face pale and eyes wide with a mix of fear and confusion. Han Shuo was composed and collected. His head was lowered as he lifted his glass, drinking wine as if nothing had happened, like he hadn't noticed what had just transpired. His actions were calculated and precise, revealing a side of him that few had seen before. Claude and Irene didn't say much to Han Shuo afterward. Claude fawningly talked with Irene, putting away glass after glass of purple Leyland with the psychedelic aphrodisiac mixed in it. Irene's expressions were cool, responding to Claude on and off. It looked like she had yet to accept Claude's love, her heart still guarded against his persistent affections. You guys take your time. I still have some matters to attend to and will be heading off now. Han Shuo knew with certainty that the psychedelic aphrodisiac powder had been absorbed by Claude when he'd drained down several glasses of purple Leyland. He immediately stood up and dropped this sentence, his eyes cold and calculating. Claude and Irene were originally derisive of Han Shuo to begin with. They'd absolutely paid no heed to him, and wished devoutly that Han Shuo would leave, as opposed to being an irritating sight in front of them. They waved their hands in unison after Han Shuo's words, indicating that Han Shuo should have left earlier if possible. After a bit of time, they no longer concealed the scorn on their faces, their eyes filled with a mix of irritation and unresolved tension. Leaving the hotel with a smile, Han Shuo stood alone in an undetectable street corner beside the hotel. After a while, a hotly flushed Claude and a slightly pink-cheeked Irene walked out side by side, heading for the north side of Drol. Their departure was hurried, their steps quickened by the lingering effects of the aphrodisiac and the embarrassment of being caught off guard. The sky was dark by now, and the festivities of the town of Drol had reached their peak. Adventurers formed in groups of 3 or 5 staggered drunkenly, loudly down the streets. Han Shuo followed the two noiselessly and stood by the side of the street, waiting for a good show upon seeing the two of them enter a luxurious hotel. According to Han Shuo's observations just now, it seemed that Claude had yet to move Irene's heart. If at this moment, under the influence of the psychedelic aphrodisiac, Claude did anything that exceeded boundaries, he was sure to be severely beaten by Irene. Han Shuo's mind raced with possibilities, his strategic thinking kicking into high gear as he anticipated the unfolding drama. Wasn't that Claude? An exclamation sounded from the adjacent street. Han Shuo swiveled his head to sudden joy, inwardly exclaiming, "Even the heavens are helping me." The light major teacher, Beecher, and a few light major students happened to be passing by. One of the female students with particularly sharp eyes just so happened to see Claude and the coy, revealing woman dart into the alley, and had cried out in astonishment. No way. How could Claude be that kind of person? He is a noble knight, and wouldn't demean himself in places like this. Not to mention that Claude is pursuing Irene right now, so there is no way that he'd do so. Beecher frowned and said in unconvinced confusion, his analytical mind struggling to reconcile the image of Claude with the behavior he had just witnessed. Ha ha ha. It really was him. I'm sure I didn't see him properly. If you don't believe me, we can go inside and check. The female student, who had spoken first, thought for a moment, and then said decisively, her determination evident in her voice, "Come, Katie, it's none of your business here. Don't go poking your nose where it doesn't belong." Beecher was silent for a moment, and then hurried the students to leave quickly, his protective instincts kicking in to prevent any potential conflicts. Katie looked angrily at the alley and stomped her foot after a moment's thought. How can this be allowed? I'm going to tell Irene. If Claude isn't in his room, then it must be him. I will absolutely not allow Claude to defraud Irene's feelings. Her voice was a mix of anger and disbelief, her loyalty to Irene overriding her skepticism. Katie left in a fast, huffy pace as soon as she'd finished talking, making a beeline for the hotel that Irene was staying at. The other light major students looked askance at each other when she left, not knowing what to do or how to handle the situation. Han Shuo almost couldn't hold his raucous laughter in. Who had thought that things would work out like this? Han Shuo had been planning on doing things himself, and thinking of a scheme to lure Irene here. Who knew that Claude was really so unlucky? Looks like it would be difficult for him to avoid bad luck today, even if he tried. His plans for revenge were falling perfectly into place, each move more calculated and intentional than the last. After a while, Irene, with a frigid expression and a huffy Katie, walked swiftly from afar. One look at Irene's expression was enough to know that she was feeling incredibly wrathful. Claude would find it tough to get out of this one, Han Shuo mused, watching as Irene's steps grew more determined and aggressive. Claude was indeed not in the hotel. Looks like I didn't see incorrectly. That must have been him just now. Irene, I think if we should go in now we'll be able to catch him in the act. How could he commit such despicable acts as a noble knight? Claude is too disgusting. Katie looked angrily at the alley after she'd arrived, her voice dripping with contempt and disbelief. Irene nodded with an icy face, wasting no moment more with talk, and grabbed Katie in a rush to the alley. Beecher and the others were afraid that a messy situation would develop and followed after a moment's hesitation, their concern evident on their faces. When they'd all gone in, Han Shuo unhurriedly made his way into the alleyway with a sinister face dressed in an evil smile. His heart raced with anticipation, knowing that his carefully laid plans were about to come to fruition. The alley was dimly lit, the shadows dancing ominously as Han Shuo prepared to confront Claude and Irene. The door to the luxurious hotel had been closed behind Claude and Irene, sealing them inside the dark alley. Han Shuo could hear the muffled sounds of their confrontation, their voices growing louder and more heated with each passing moment. He took a deep breath, his mind focused and his resolve unshaken. As he approached the center of the alley, the tension in the air was palpable. Claude, flushed with the effects of the aphrodisiac in Irene's relentless pursuit, struggled to maintain his composure. Irene, on the other hand, exuded an aura of unyielding authority, her eyes burning with determination. Claude, why are you here? What are you trying to prove? Irene demanded, her voice cold and unwavering. Claude, now visibly intoxicated by the aphrodisiac, stammered, I just wanted to spend some time with you, Irene. I didn't mean for things to get out of hand. Han Shuo stepped forward, his presence commanding and menacing. Enough, Claude. It's time to face the consequences of your actions. His voice was smooth, yet carried an underlying threat that sent chills down the spines of both Claude and Irene. Irene glared at Han Shuo, her eyes narrowing. Who are you to interfere, Brian? This doesn't concern you. Han Shuo's wicked smile widened as he pulled out a hidden dagger from his undergarment, the blade glinting ominously in the dim light. Oh, but it does concern me. You see, Claude, your actions have not gone unnoticed, and it's time someone taught you a lesson. Claude backed away, his earlier bravado fading as he realized the gravity of the situation. Brian, please, let's not do this. It was just a misunderstanding. Han Shuo took a step closer, the tension in the alley escalating. No more misunderstandings, Claude. You've crossed a line, and now you must pay the price. His eyes gleamed with a mixture of anger and satisfaction, relishing the moment of confrontation. Before Claude could respond, Han Shuo lunged forward, his dagger aimed directly at Claude's heart. The swift motion left Claude no time to react, and the blade found its mark, piercing through his chest with deadly precision. Claude collapsed to the ground, gasping for breath, his eyes wide with shock and fear. Irene watched in horror as her beloved Claude fell lifelessly to the ground. Brian, what have you done? She cried out, her voice breaking with a mixture of anger and sorrow. Han Shuo stood over Claude's body, his expression cold and unforgiving. Consider this a belated revenge, Irene. Your Claude should have known better than to disrespect someone like me. His words were sharp, each syllable laced with malice. Irene, trembling with rage and grief, stepped back, her eyes blazing with fury. You think killing him will solve anything? You've lost all sense of honor and decency. Her voice echoed through the alley, filled with a venomous disdain for Han Shuo. Han Shuo shrugged nonchalantly, his gaze unwavering. Perhaps, but sometimes, sacrifices must be made to achieve one's goals. His voice was devoid of remorse, the darkness within him fully unleashed. As Irene turned away, tears streaming down her face, Han Shuo felt a sense of accomplishment wash over him. His revenge had been swift and decisive, leaving no room for doubt about his capabilities. He took a moment to survey the alley, the lifeless body of Claude lying before him, a testament to his growing power and unrelenting pursuit of his goals. With a final glance, Han Shuo turned and walked out of the alley, his mind already plotting the next steps in his intricate game of power and vengeance. The allure of gold coins and the promise of greater strength fueled his ambition, driving him forward into the darkened streets of Drol, where new challenges awaited.